I'm kind of, as I alluded to in my opening statement, it's sort of confusing to me because it's a reversionary interest that we're talking about, but the problem I have is that there is evidence of compensation that has been paid along the way. So first of all, does BLM in any way deny receiving, I think one of the issues referenced was the Freeman Road property. Do you deny receiving anything like that from the city of Tucson, or what the Mr. Ortega testified to, that was basic compensation received over the time by the BLM? Do you deny any of that?
Thank you for the question. Basically, as I understand it, there was a contemplation of doing an exchange back in 1998. But for whatever reason, it wasn't completed that way. So how it was completed was as a recreation and public purposes lease and patent and a donation. And when you put them into those types of boxes, it has this reversionary clause attached to it. So and it needed to be an exchange to be able to not have this reversionary clause where you have
my question, sir, is whether or not you received those benefits.
Yes, obviously we received those.
And all the other things that Mr. Ortega spoke to, like basically settling the lawsuit plus transferring,
there's no dispute on any of those. That's correct.
There's no dispute.
Correct.
So what you're here telling us, and the reason we're having to go through this exercise is because for some reason it doesn't fit into a nice box for the BLM, so that, and it wasn't identified as such in the beginning, so that's why we're having to do an act of Congress, basically, to make it all right, because the BLM and by your testimony, the city didn't quite identify this exchange properly. Am I understanding what the bottom line is here?
No, we are here because BLM has followed the laws that you have passed, that Congress has passed, when it comes to RNPP leases and patents, and that's the rules that we're having to follow. We can't change them. You can tell us to change them. You can pass an exception to that, and we'll be the first ones to go ahead and complete it.
So how do you then explain to the people of the city of Tucson that you have been unjustly enriched? Really, that's what's happened. You've received property, you've received all these benefits, but because you're saying that it doesn't take the proper form, that somehow it now takes that wonderful word, an act of Congress, to make it all right? That's what you're saying, aren't you?
I am saying that that was what was stated at the time, even, that enabling legislation was required to finish the deal. That was never done. So maybe it'll happen now.
But you have the authority under the existing laws that allowed you to transfer this property, some public land thing, because it was then anticipated that it would be used for parks or other public services. There's no compensation that has to come from the city of Tucson for that. Are we in agreement on that?
The process goes that we go through a fair market evaluation that determines what those values are, so to ensure, for instance, that the city didn't compensate us too much. I mean, it goes in both directions.
But isn't that for the reversionary interest? But for the actual public purpose, there needs to be no compensation. Isn't that correct?
If it's a reversionary interest, so there would be specific purposes which aren't commercial, which
exactly.
A cell tower is a commercial.
So what all you're saying is that with all this money that the city of Tucson has given you in some form or another, that because you didn't do the proper valuation, that you don't know if it's enough? You've received all of this, you've had it for all these years.
Or it could be too much. I mean, that's the point.
So are you willing to refund to the city of Tucson if it's done and then they've paid you too much?
If a fair market evaluation is done and it's determined that it was going
Isn't it better for us to simply allow this to go through and say, thank you very much if you paid us too much, and if you didn't pay us too much, then you know what? You've had the benefit of the use of the funds and as well as the benefit of the transaction, so we should call it even, and unfortunately it's going to take an act of Congress to make right what BLM hasn't been able to do all these years. Don't you think at some point you just have to say, you know, thank you, and we'll just part our ways?
We feel like we have to follow what the law tells us.
Unless the Congress tells you otherwise.
Correct.
And I got to tell you, I'm with the chairman on this. I think this is a a waste of our time, but if that's what we got to do, that's what we got to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I
yield
hate to
back.
interrupt, you're on a roll. Mr. Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.